Good morning, dear friends. My name is Vladimir Karamurza. I'm a Russian opposition politician, and I have the honor of moderating our first morning panel today on what would John McCain do. And I first of all want to thank the organizers of the Halifax International Security Forum for bringing us together and for finding a way to bring us together even during these crazy times. I think what we missed most of all over these past 18 months has been seeing the faces of our friends, and it's so good to see so many here this morning. It's wonderful to see Mrs. McCain and Peter. Thank you for everything you've done to make this happen. It's now been more than 3 years since Senator McCain's voice fell silent, and I think all of us in our different ways feel the absence of his voice very, very strongly. I can certainly say that about my own country. I'll never forget the first time I took Russian opposition leader Boris Nemtsov to see Senator McCain. This was in 2010. This was our first meeting about the Magnitsky Act, or the Magnitsky Bill as it was then, the piece of legislation aimed at imposing targeted individual sanctions in the form of visa bans and asset freezes on those Putin regime officials who are complicit in human rights abuses and corruption. And people were telling us, this will never happen, you will never do this, the interests prevailing are too powerful, you'll never get this done. And Senator McCain, from the very earliest stages of this, as nobody in this room would be surprised, emerged as the strongest voice in support of this principle. And our first meeting was in his office in the Russell building, and when we walked in, Boris started initially sort of to say some introductory words about the situation in Russia, and Senator McCain just broke him off and started, bullet point asking very precise, very specific, very detailed question about, some of the minute details of what was happening in Russia, and literally boom, 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 as those of you who knew him would not be surprised at all. And I remember we walked out of that meeting, and Boris Nemtsov turned to me and said, that man is not 75 years old. And I think this sharpness of mind, this awareness of international affairs is what we all miss about him. But most of all, I think what we miss is the commitment to principle. Vladimir Bukovsky, a famed Soviet era dissident, once wrote that the problem with Western politicians is that too many of them care about their ability to fry their morning bacon on Soviet gas much more than they care about human rights concerns. Well, this could definitely not be said about Senator John McCain. And the question that is the title of our panel this morning, what would John McCain do? When it comes to my own country, I think I dare say that there's little doubt of what he would have done had he been with us today. He would have been outspoken in defense of Russian political prisoners, of which we now have more than 400, including, of course, most prominently opposition leader Alexei Navalny. He would have been outspoken about the news that comes out of Moscow every day about another NGO being banned, another organization being declared undesirable or foreign agent. He would have been outspoken in defense of the right of Russian citizens, as he would have been outspoken about the rights of citizens anywhere to exercise their right to freedom of peaceful assembly. And for this, in Russia, you can get several years in prison just for exercising that fundamental right. I think I can say with confidence that Senator McCain would have been very strongly in support of the congressional initiative in Washington that was announced 2 days ago on Thursday, and that sent people in the Kremlin, in Lavrov's foreign ministry, in the Duma and the Federation Council, and all over the official buildings in Moscow into a state of hysteria yesterday, because on Thursday evening, a bipartisan group of House members introduced a resolution on the withdrawal of official US recognition of Vladimir Putin as president of Russia from May the 7th, 2024, when he will very likely, most likely, almost certainly attempt to remain in power despite the end of his final constitutional term in office. As you all know, under the cover of the pandemic last year, Mr. Putin pushed through a series of unlawful constitutional amendments, essentially giving him a personal waiver from presidential term limits, allowing himself to remain president for life. And just as with so many previous instances of violating the law, he thought he could get away with it internationally, and it was really important to see a bipartisan group of House members this week that say, we have to put a stop to this somewhere. And it's a resolution drawing on similar initiatives that had been previously enacted against the Maduro regime in Venezuela, against, of course, the Lukashenko regime in Belarus and others, where you have an illegitimate usurper who claims to be a lawful president of the country. And I think it's a very important position of principle for the democratic nations, for the nations that rightfully pride themselves on their adherence to such notions as the rule of law, democracy, and human rights, to withhold recognition from these unlawful usurpers. And this is exactly what that House resolution introduced 2 days ago proposes to do. And I think I can say with confidence that Senator McCain would have been very much in support of this measure and many others. But we will be talking about different corners of the world today. And as always, with the Halifax International Security Forum, I want to leave as much time as possible for interactions and questions and conversations. And so after a few words of introductions from our two distinguished speakers this morning, I want to launch straight into conversation with the audience. I want to remind you all that this is an on-the-record session. In fact, it is being streamed live as we speak. When you ask the question, please say your name and identify your affiliation, and there will be a microphone going around the room for the purpose of the video stream and recording. Both of our speakers need no introduction, but it is my role as a moderator still to introduce them. First, I will ask Dr. Nancy O'Kale to say a few words. She's a scholar, an author, a human rights advocate, a fellow at the University of Stanford, previously director of the Tahrir Institute for Middle East Policy, also led the Egypt program at Freedom House, and several years ago was notoriously indicted and sentenced by an Egyptian court for conspiring with foreign NGOs to foment domestic unrest. Something sounds painfully close to home for us in Russia. And then I will ask His Excellency Petro Poroshenko, the former president of Ukraine, the 5th president of Ukraine, and the first one to be elected in the first ballot, and with support equally from the east and west of the country, in spite of Ukraine's well-known and entrenched political divide. Since stepping down from the presidency in 2019, he has been leader of the opposition in the Verkhovna Rada, the Ukrainian parliament. Mr. President, it's good to see you, as always. But I will ask Dr. O'Kale to say a few words of introduction first.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me here. It's such an honor to speak with you, Mr. President, and to reconnect with you again, Vladimir. Actually, the last time we met was in the Sedona Forum, and it was at the McCain's Institute's presence, and just going straight into the issue, and just because you mentioned the NGO case, I remember the first time I met Senator McCain 10 years ago, and as always with anyone who knows him very well, we started by a fight, a quarrel. It was like yelling at each other across the U.S. Embassy in Cairo. 17 Americans are part of like 43 people indicted in Egypt, and we're arguing whether the Americans should leave first, and then the whole trial would be resolved. And like Liz Kimball is here reminded me yesterday, like every time I remember, like I see your name and Senator McCain's, I remember that scene. But the greatest thing about Senator McCain is that he is always ready to revise his views and rethink positions, and he feels okay with accepting differences in position. Later on, of course, like he has been an incredible supporter and one of the people who stood really strongly against the case that was launched against us, and we ended up like being acquitted in 2018. So looking at that and looking what's about the role of the U.S. as we see it today, and how the Biden administration is faring out concerning the policies that are being recognized, forged, and prioritized. And I think to look at the issues, I think the Biden administration is on point on identifying and defining the most important issues. And if we can take that from even the agenda of the upcoming Summit for Democracy, is anti-corruption, standing against authoritarianism, support for human rights, and adding to that, of course, the strong supportive position for the climate change and addressing the impacts of climate change in the world. So these are like very important issues. But I think the thing that I would have concerns about is not the issues, is the approach and the measures that are being taken to address those issues, and how there's an assessment of how the administration is faring out on those issues. So to start with, concerning approach, I'm not the biggest fan of summits as a solution for everything, and I'm going to explain later why. And the second thing, in addition of recognizing and approaching those very important issues, there are other policies and measures that the U.S. is taking that is also harmful. One of them is the huge amount of arms transfers around the world, and particularly to the Middle East. Like 50% of U.S. arms transfers goes to the Middle East, and the huge military aid, security assistance in general, that goes mostly to countries that are authoritarian. And finally is the position on refugees and migration. And just a couple of minutes to just take into consideration is what is the state of the world now? I'm going to give an example through the Middle East. I mean, because it's harshly affected, but it also relates to so many things happening even on other parts of the world. I just want to take a step back and remember the last time we were here in Halifax in 2019, the pre-COVID point or state. At that point, in the fall of 2019, all protests that happened in the Arab world and the Middle East, and also in many countries around the world, the common denominator of all of them was corruption. This was very significant in so many ways, and one of them is that, first of all, it countered the narrative of authoritarian regimes that always claim that those protests are asking for Western ideals, but we want to put bread on the table of the people. Those are just want to spread homosexuality, or even things that are not as a priority of improving the economy and providing for the people. But when people go out in the street addressing corruption, that just flips their argument. It just brings it down. And the second thing, it was interesting to see that protests in Iraq, for example, at the time, that is not driven by sectarian issues. It was also about corruption. So it was Egypt, Lebanon, Algeria, Sudan. All the protests in 2019 were about corruption. And it is a huge issue. And I commend the Biden administration on looking at this issue. The World Economic Forum estimates that the cost of corruption for developing countries is around 1.2 trillion. And just to put things into perspective, that is the size of the economy of Switzerland, Belgium, and South Africa combined, as they would say. So it is an important issue. But then the events that happened later on combined and increased the pressure on those governments. Corruption and countries that are operating with bad governance and have corruption can always find ways to keep things together until there's a crisis. And the crises come and they expose the system. So when the pandemic happened in 2020, after those waves of protests against corruption, it came as both as a curse and a blessing to those leaders. It was a curse, of course, because it puts pressure on the system, exposes the capacity of the government, and also all the other well-known impacts on the economy, under pressure. And additionally, crisis always gets people to pay attention to policies. People start asking questions about the safety nets, the healthcare capacity. And people who would normally call these things that these are like political issues that we are not concerned with, it becomes like a first priority for them. So that's a challenge. However, the impact of the pandemic on the economies did not happen right when the pandemic happened. What happened is a blessing in disguise for those countries where they used the pandemic as a reason to quell the protests. It was, I mean, an opportunity that came rightly so to have the lockdown and everything, but it was a way to quell those protests. And the second thing is the blessing that it's happening all over the world. And it just gives an excuse, like if we're not really performing well, if we're not delivering, I mean, look at the United States. I mean, they're even suffering as well, so it's not an issue with us. So it was kind of a blessing in a way. Then later on, when the economic effects start to like appear, and it took time when it had its effect. For example, it's like when we see like what happened in Tunisia at the end. Again, issues of corruption, but what exposed it is the kind of pressure that this has had. And the other issue, again, commanding the Biden's administration on it, is the issue of climate change, and particularly in this part of the world. I'm going to stop after this, is the issue of water scarcity. And this is a huge burden and threat to the region. It is a hot and dry region. This year recorded the highest rates, actually double the rates in the world on the increase in temperature, droughts. Adding to that, some unwise policies, to say the least, of some countries, for example, like Turkey with its project of 22 dams around the Euphrates and Tigris, which is actually affecting the flow of water supply to Iraq, which is actually losing 295 square kilometers per year of its arable land. The same thing we've seen yesterday, the protest in Asfahan in Iran. I mean, just like that scene, like it happened in July, and it's like sustained. And this, other than the immediate effect of like the lack of water supply and its impact on food supply later on, and I mean, Ambassador McCain, you'll probably be addressing those issues. It also affects the migration and refugee issues, where we have water refugees, because they tend to leave those rural areas, move to the cities, put even more pressure on the government and like the capacity of the government, which is already fragile, and it exposes this. I know I'll stop here, and then maybe later we'll talk about like how to address this and how the U.S. is dealing with those issues.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Raquel. And I just want to draw out two issues that you focused on. One, the pandemic as a blessing for dictators in many cases. That I can tell you that's certainly true in Russia. You know, in Moscow, pretty much everything is open by now. You can go to theaters, cinemas, restaurants, book fairs, festivals. Everything is more or less back to normal, with three important exceptions. There are only three places where COVID is still dangerous, apparently. One is the courtroom. If you're a journalist who wishes to cover a court hearing, especially when it concerns a political prisoner, no, you're not allowed to go because of COVID. Secondly, of course, and God forbid, that's the worst thing of all, opposition rallies. These are completely prohibited because you cannot do that. You know, when Putin wanted to get 50,000 people into Luzhniki Stadium to celebrate the anniversary of the annexation of Crimea, no problem with COVID. But if we try to hold a meeting, then people get arrested, people get indicted with breaking sanitary rules. And a third place, apparently, as we found out this past September, was the OSCE observer mission for the Russian so-called parliamentary elections, because for the first time ever, OSCE observers were essentially barred from observing the parliamentary elections in Russia, of course, because there's a danger of COVID. Those are the three places where it's still limited to, so that's something that rings very true in our own case. And the second sort of issue you pointed out is corruption. Of course, that's something that's close to heart for us as well. Just this past January, hundreds of thousands of people were demonstrating across Russia, not just in support of the imprisoned opposition leader Alexei Navalny, but also in protest of this brazen, astonishing corruption that was sort of shown, only the tip of the iceberg was shown with this lavish palace that Vladimir Putin's built for himself for $1.5 billion on the Black Sea. But that, of course, is an issue, and again, what I want to link up to what I was referring to earlier with Senator McCain's leadership on the Magnitsky Act all those years ago. Corruption is an issue, at least when it comes to Russia. It's an issue that, you know, has two sides. And one side, of course, is the fact that these people who make up the core of the current regime, the people in and around the Kremlin, have made a habit of stealing in Russia and then spending and stashing away that money in the West. This was the purpose of the Magnitsky Act, to stop them from being able to do that. But that is, of course, a two-way street. You know, it's been said that the largest export from Putin's regime to the West is not oil or gas, it is corruption. That is absolutely true. But it takes two to tango, and for somebody to be able to export corruption, someone else needs to be willing to import it. And we have seen no shortage of Western countries, Western governments, Western banks, Western financial institutions who have been willing to act essentially as accomplices and enablers to that export of kleptocracy from the Putin regime to the West. And the Magnitsky Principle is an important antidote to that. I flew in here late last night from London when we had the annual Magnitsky Awards and the briefing that we hold every year, of course, except last year, in November, to take stock of the situation. And we are now up to 33 countries and jurisdictions in the world that have passed this legislation that was led with Senator McCain and Senator Cardin in the United States all those years ago, that lays down a very simple principle, that those individuals, these are individual sanctions, not sanctions against countries or populations, those individuals who are personally complicit in human rights abuses and corruption in their own countries, wherever that might be, will no longer be able to get visas, own assets, or use the financial and banking systems of Western democracies. And I hope when we take stock of this next year, it will be many more even than today. But with this, I want to invite President Poroshenko for your introductory words.
Thank you. Thank you, Vladimir. Distinguished audience, first of all, let me congratulate you for the, at least we have a Halifax Security Forum meeting, first security forum after pandemic in the world. And I'm so happy to see you after 2 years. We're missing you, and I think this is a great discussion we have an opportunity to have today. The second, I was very much appreciated for the invitation for me to participate in exactly in this panel, because this is very creative approach and very right approach. What Senator McCain do in this situation? Very helpful. Why it's so important for me? Because Senator McCain was a great friend of Ukraine. He immediately fell in love in the modern Ukrainian democracy immediately after the Revolution of Dignity. It's happened in one moment. Exactly on the scene of the Maidan, temperature was at that time -31. He go on the scene without a coat, because I was without a coat, together with Senator Murphy. And on the Maidan, on the square, it was several 100,000 people. And this is first time in history of my country, after 70 years of communism, when hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people on the Maidan scanded, USA, USA. Just was so happy to see Senator McCain on the scene as a symbol of our future victory. It's impossible to underestimate how important this for my 40 million nation, the biggest by territory country of Europe. And on the 25th of August 1997, I lost my brother. And I was lost part of me. Exactly after 21 years, on the 25th of August year 2019, all of us lost part of us. We understand how it was important for the world, for the global security, because the world became different without him. And that's why it is a bright idea to speak and to discuss what Senator McCain do. 1 year, a little bit more than 1 year before he gone, he was my guest in Kiev. It was just an ordinary visit on the 30th of December, year 2016. Very next day, he planned to go to Tbilisi. And he asked me, Mr. President, what you will do tomorrow? And I asked, I go to my Marine on the front line. And he said, I go with you to the front. I said, no, 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 you have a problem with your security. No, he said, them will have a problem with me. And the very next morning, we took my plane, go to Mariupol, and then go to Shirokino. Position of my Marine was 200 meters from the Russian troops. And 7 kilometers approaching my Marine, my intelligence report me that Russians start artillery fire. And I said, Senator, sorry, I should be with them. This is not possible under artillery. You go there. I said, Mr. President, keep silence. Nobody knows that I am with you. Very McCain style. And he go together with the Senator Lindsey Graham and Amy Klobuchar. And me, on behalf of my Marine, present him an automatic gun. And he said that this is the most valuable gift because he received it on the front. And then he sent me the photo from his office with this automatic gun on the good place. And we meet the New Year Eve on the front line. This is symbolizing the person, the scale of the leadership of the Senator McCain. He was true leader and was true friend of Ukraine, and I all the time feel his shoulder in the most difficult situation of Russian aggression. And sometimes he gave me very important advice. And I can only imagine what advice would be today if I have an opportunity to call him, what kinds of messages I can hear from him. Let's think about that. Message number 1 from Senator McCain would be, don't be afraid. This is extremely important. Don't trust Putin and don't afraid Putin. And this is the only way how we can win. And I follow this advice all 5 years of my presidency, and we saved my nation. And we released from the Russian troops 2/3 of the occupied Donbass by decisive steps of my army. And we keep sovereignty, keep territorial integrity, and keep independence of my nation. Not only because we create a new Ukrainian army, but because we have a unity of the global coalition in support of Ukraine and solidarity with Ukraine, with the leadership of US, Canada, NATO, Japan, Australia, the whole world. This is the key issue for victory of my country. So don't be afraid. Second piece of advice would be act. In my presidential office, I have his phrase. Courage is not an absence of fear. Courage is an ability to act despite the fear. Because everybody has a fear, no doubt, including possibly Senator McCain. But the fear is only mobilize him to act decisively. And the third, probably advice from him was act effectively. And this is what we need now, to act effectively. If it is connected with Ukraine, what act effectively means now? What Ukraine need from the free world? What Ukraine need from the United States, Canada, from our partners? I can imagine that point number one, we need to have a clear perspective for NATO membership in Ukraine, for Ukraine. We need now urgently, maybe in the June, for the next summit of NATO in Madrid next year. We need membership action plan. This is the stick and this is the carrot. This is the motivation for providing reform, and this is the great efforts to increase the European and global security. And that is, if we get the membership action plan, if we get the clear perspective, confirm the clear perspective of NATO, because when I participated in the NATO summit, all the time I ask all the leaders of the member states, does everybody support Ukrainian membership in NATO? And does anybody against that? No one hand was raised when I said against. I said, does we are free world and only Ukrainian people can make a decision, does we be a member of NATO? Or all of us will ask the permission of Putin. Does he allow us to be a member of the free world? Because I'm proud that on the September 18 in year 2014, when I have an honor to be in the United States Congress, I said that Ukrainian soldiers and Ukrainian people are fighting not only for our sovereignty and territorial integrity, we're fighting for freedom. We're fighting for democracy. We're fighting for human rights, and we're fighting for global security. And point number two, exactly as Senator McCain said in the clip, we need effective and modern defensive weapons just to increase the price for Putin if he decides to attack us, if he crosses the red line. And this is point number two, which definitely Senator McCain support as he do on the previous Halifax forum. Point number three, sanction. We shouldn't keep it in the pocket. We should just publish it. If you attack Ukraine, this and these things happening in your energy sector, in your financial sector, in your security sector, and that would be the sanction of the whole world, because you are destabilizing the world. So point number three, sanction. Point number four, support of reform to increase resilience of Ukraine in the security sector, in the economic sector, in the fighting against corruption, in the rule of law, because this is the only precondition for us to be the member of the European Union, to be the member of the NATO. So support of reform. And point number five, I can continue this list, but let's finishing. Point number five is the energy security. Because what he do in Europe, it is a disaster. This is clear Putin victory, and we cannot allow them to win. And what is the key issue for the energy security as a first step? Nord Stream 2. We need to present a sanction, very clear answer. Because Nord Stream 2 is not an energy and not an economic project. Nord Stream 2 is a security project who killing Ukraine. And we cannot have any compromise on that. And this is very promising that Germany stopped certification. This is very promising that thanks to distinguished senators and members of Congress, you already registered the draft law, and maybe as a part of the military budget, that would be the sanction on the Nord Stream 2. Please continue this work. This is extremely important. And this is the part of the heritage of Senator McCain, definitely. And with this situation, I think that that would be a great commemoration if we do this job. Because when we last met with the ambassador, when I was a president, I promised her that in commemoration of the great achievement of Senator McCain for Ukrainian people, me as a president put an initiative to name the street in the center of Kyiv after Senator McCain. And I was so happy that Kyiv City Council support my presidential proposal. And today we have in the center of Kyiv the street named after Senator McCain. And this is the most prestigious address in Kyiv. So please, next time, Senator, I invite you visiting Kyiv. I will be in December in Washington. Let's have a meeting on the Senator McCain Street. That would be a great idea. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. We'll go in a moment to questions from the audience. Just want to draw also on one important point that you made, what you began with by saying that Senator McCain was a friend of Ukraine. When he passed away more than 3 years ago, Russian state media, you can obviously all of you here imagine, and maybe many of you have read sort of the tonality of what they were writing, and it's difficult to begin comparing the lies of the Kremlin propaganda machine. There have been so many, it would be difficult competition to sort of decide what some of these worst lies were, but I would definitely put on the top of that list this notion that Russian state media put out, and continues, by the way, to put out, that Senator McCain was somehow, quote-unquote, an enemy of Russia. He never was. Because Russia and the kleptocratic authoritarian regime of Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin are two different things. And when Senator McCain led on the Magnitsky Act and was one of the very few people in Washington who persevered and took it across the finish line. And I remember when Boris Nemtsov and I were sitting in the visitor gallery watching the House of Representatives in November of 2012 pass this piece of legislation, Boris turned to me and said, "This is the most pro-Russian law ever passed in the history of any foreign country, because it targets the people who abuse the rights of Russian citizens and who steal the money of Russian taxpayers by taking away their ability to use Western countries and Western financial systems as havens for the wealth that they are stealing from their own people." And I very often use that phrase, that this is the most pro-Russian piece of legislation. And so Senator McCain, of course, is needless to say in this audience, but I want to say it because it's important. He was never an enemy of Russia. He was a friend of the Russian people. He always believed in that vision of a Europe whole, free, and at peace that will never be possible until a democratic Russia is a part of that project. And by the way, a small factual correction to what the President has said. Ukraine, of course, is one of the largest countries in Europe, but not the largest country in Europe is Russia. And this is why this notion of a Europe free, whole, and at peace. And actually, it's an important point. I had a meeting a couple of years ago with the Foreign Minister of Lithuania in Vilnius. And the first thing I noticed, I walked in, he had a big National Geographic map of Europe on his wall. And I said, "Thank you, Mr. Minister, for having this, and I wish more of your Western European counterparts had the same, because I'm so tired, for example, of hearing Alexander Lukashenko of Belarus described as the last dictator in Europe, because the people who say that, either they've missed their geography, they think that Vladimir Putin's a Democrat. Because if you look at the map of Europe, that massive big part on the right there, that is called the Russian Federation. And so this was a notion that I think it's important to say also. And the one point that the President ended on, very symbolic, very important, the street named after John McCain in Kiev. Of course, perhaps the last initiative that Senator McCain has led on, and that actually came to fruition in 2018, was the initiative to name the street in front of the Russian embassy in Washington, D.C., after Boris Nemtsov. And anybody who goes on Wisconsin Avenue to the main gate of the embassy of the Russian Federation in Washington, D.C. today will see that sign saying Boris Nemtsov Plaza. He was too ill already to travel to Washington for the unveiling in February of 2018, but he sent a very heartfelt and very eloquent note, and this initiative would never have happened without him. And as I said at the opening of Boris Nemtsov Plaza in Washington, D.C., to me, as a Russian citizen, I can think of nothing more pro-Russian than to name a street in front of the Russian embassy after a Russian statesman. And whatever the people around Putin and Lavrov and others say about this today, I know one day my country will be proud, and this would never have happened without Senator McCain, and for this we're deeply grateful. And I want to acknowledge friends in this room, Senator Shaheen, Senator Coons, who was the lead Democrat in this initiative, Senator Wicker, who will be speaking later on today at this forum, who have made this possible. And I cannot tell you, I don't have enough words in any language to say how important this is for so many of us in Russia. So thank you so much for making this happen. With this, let's go to questions. I think we will take 3 questions at a time, and then I will ask our speakers to address them. Please identify yourself by name and your affiliation. And I believe we do we have microphones going around the room? Yes, we do. So let's go to you.
We heard a very moving testimony on a great man. I want to ask a question.
Take the second mic, because I think this one is, it's not functioning properly.
Senator McCain was a man who managed to bring together...
Could you say your name and affiliation, please?
Oh, sorry. Jean-Marie Guéhenno, former Undersecretary for Peacekeeping and now professor at Columbia University. Senator McCain was a man who had the courage and wisdom to bring together the geopolitical agenda and the democratic agenda, to reconcile them. And my candid question is that I think today there's sometimes a tension between the two. The geopolitical agenda is indeed about countering some ambitions of China, countering Russia, countering Iran, to take 3 cases. And we always say that those 3 agendas and the democratic agenda are one and the same. But the reality too often is that in the name of countering those 3 countries, we ally ourselves with countries that are not so democratic. And there is a kind of democratic washing, so to speak, as they say, of greenwashing, where for the sake of pretending to be against, to be opposed to the dictatorships in China, to the authoritarian regime in Russia, to the dictatorship in Iran, we look the other way when some of the countries that are in that coalition actually limit human rights. We have countries opposed to China where democracy is actually receding. We have in the Middle East countries opposed to Iran, and we just heard it from the speaker, who assassinate their opponents, who put in jail their opponents. We have countries resisting Russia and courageously resisting Russia, but where domestically we see a regression in human rights. And so my question is really, how are we going to make sure that the legitimate coalition that we have to have against those authoritarian or regimes or dictatorships, how are we going to make sure that that does not become a convenient diversion from our own issues? Yesterday we heard Senator Tim Kaine and Constance Stelzenmüller, and I think they were right on target when they stressed our own weaknesses, our own crisis. And sometimes I'm afraid that the international agenda prevents us from looking also within what we need to correct if we want to be an example that carries weight and continues to inspire. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Ambassador Paul Dobryansky. And there is a microphone coming. Yeah, it's just from behind you there on the right.
Thank you so much. Is this on? Yes. I'm Paula Dobryansky, Harvard University. First, I want to congratulate you, Peter. This is an incredible topic. And as President Poroshenko said, very creative and just very well-deserved on this particular day. My question, comment and question is going to go to President Poroshenko. I cannot help myself. And listening to you, I felt, you know, Senator McCain, as you know, you said he was a very good friend of Ukraine. He was a hero in Ukraine, as you know. And why? Because he not only spoke about what needed to be done, but he always acted on it. He really acted on it. So I want to go to the 5 points you mentioned, and the last one in particular, because I think there's been a shift. You've mentioned energy security and how this is a time to look at this issue, and particularly in light of the Russian troops that are amassed at the Ukrainian border. And what is done will matter greatly, because if we just say we're going to do some things, Russia will not be deterred and Putin will not be deterred. But action matters here. In this case, I was very struck by the fact that the EU's Borrell has spoken of the weaponization of energy and of gas, and said we need to take action. So towards that end, you mentioned Nord Stream 2. Should we move forward and lift that waiver and actually sanction Nord Stream 2? You didn't quite say it, so I'm pushing you in this regard, because I personally think that Senator McCain, who did talk about Russia as being, remember, a rather, lowly gas station masquerading as a country. I remember that phrase quite often. So in this case, shouldn't we move forward on Nord Stream 2 at this time? Thank you.
And for question number 3, I'd like to go to Peter McCain, former Minister of Foreign Affairs and National Defense of Canada. And Paul, if you could just hand over literally behind you on the left. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Actually, Paula hit a lot of the points that I wanted to make. And Mr. President, Dr. Vladimir, wonderful to have you back in Halifax. When people do courageous things in the world today, as all of you have done in speaking out about injustice, you're keeping the spirit of John McCain alive. And Cindy, it's so wonderful to have you back in Halifax. You are family to this forum, to this city, and Sedona will always have a special place in my heart. Vladimir, you come to us not just from London, but from Russia, and where you have yourself been imprisoned and poisoned. And the politics of energy, I think, as Paula has eloquently put it, is something that we've been talking about here as everywhere, and climate change is something we're all seized with. Do you feel, to the panel, that the discussion around energy that just happened in Glasgow at COP26, discussions moving us away from reliance on fossil fuels, can impact many of these countries? Russia, obviously, Iran, places where we know Saudi Arabia, the ethical production of fossil fuels and energy is not top of mind. Human rights not top of mind in those energy pursuits. But the West, democratic countries who also, as you say, need gas to fry their bacon in the morning, can make different decisions. And we in North America have energy that could be part of that transition away from reliance on countries like Russia and Iran. And just if you would unpack that a little further, because this, I think, is even in many cases far more effective than anything that NATO can do, anything that economic sanctions can do, providing an energy alternative that takes away the power of a Vladimir Putin to turn off the gas, because there's a reliable energy source coming from a partner and a friend.
Okay, let's do this in reverse order. So, President Poroshenko, you start first.
First answer would be for the democracy. I can agree that now is not an easy time for the democracy. And from one side, we have a danger of dictatorship, which proposing very simple solution for any problem of the world. They just need an authoritarianism. And the second part where democracy is attacked is a populism, which is deliver again simple decision, which never taking place. I'm absolutely confident, and I'm absolutely sure that the Senator McCain support me. Despite of his decisive character, he was Democrat with a great literal D. No doubt about that. And I give you one very simple example. Vladimir can confirm that Putin has all the power as a real Tsar or dictator in Russia. The last 8 years, after crazy aggression in Crimea and in Donbass, the global coalition for Ukraine introduced the sanction. And the all pro-Putin speakers said sanction is not efficient. Sanction is not playing the role. Come on. What is the economic growth of Russia during the last 8 years? 0. Why? Because of sanction. What is the reason for introducing sanction? Aggression and not implementation Minsk agreement for 8 years. What is the average salary in Russia was in the year 2013? $900. What is the average salary in Russia in the year 2021? $690. This is the answer for the efficiency of sanction, efficiency of democracy, and efficiency of the authoritarianism. And why we have some example of the global opinion in the world that, okay, but Russia is a successful country. Because of the fact that information fake news campaign is the part of the hybrid war. And we need just to learn how to protect our nation from this fake news information war. It is not an easy job, and we know how important it is in Ukraine when this information war support pro-fifth column of Russia. We know how it was important when Russia tried to penetrate to the US, Germany, Netherlands, European election campaign. And the purpose of our union would be to win this war with Russia, including the information war. So my first draft of the decision, democracy is probably the very bad things. Slowly, bureaucratic, complicated, but there is nothing better in the world than democracy. This is point number one.
Mr. President, 1 minute, if you may.
Sorry?
1 minute, because I have the...
Sorry. I just want to answer about the energy sanction and the efficiency of the Nord Stream 2. Believe me, Nord Stream 2 is not about an energy. Nord Stream 2 is not about economy. Nord Stream 2 is about security, global security. Nord Stream 2 give an additional finance to Putin. We finance a dictatorship. Nord Stream 2 undermined the security of Ukraine. This is not only withdraw from Ukraine $3 billion payment for the transit. And $3 billion, this is the budget for all of our army. But this is just open the hands for Putin to attack Ukraine, because now existing of the gas transportation system of Ukraine is the protector, because Putin killed in his own leg, shoot in his own leg if he attack now. But when Nord Stream 2 would functioning, he don't need anymore this security element. So let's think that this is the same important as the military assistance and the investment in the global security. And please, we have now a unique opportunity, because Putin do a very stupid things to stop Putin. And third answer, does the Putin attack us now when he has a concentration of his troops on our border? My answer, nobody knows. Even Putin don't know. Because if the world would be soft, if the world would be weak, Putin go as far as we allow them. But if our answer would be strong, if list of the sanction would be published, this is definitely stop Putin on the border. No any other solution.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. President, and I wish we had 5 hours for the conversation on topics we're raising, but I have this threatening countdown here in front of me, so we can continue these conversations in the corridors and over dinner, but I just want to make sure to give the concluding word to Dr. Nancy Oakale, and you have 3 minutes and 28 seconds for that.
That's
The floor is yours.
I don't think I need to argue to convince anyone that the issue between the contrast between democracy and security and stability, that's a false dichotomy. And I think everyone here knows that, understand it. The issue comes when it's like the policy implementation. And I think, like, borrowing from one of the points that Mr. President mentioned about Senator McCain's advice or strong points about policy is the issue of effective policies. So I think if we want to address this issue, and you're talking about democracy on one hand and security on the other hand, I think there are three things the US needs to take into consideration when they're carving their policies. One being strategic, effective, and consistent. The problem with US policy these days, and it's been like that for like the past decades, it moved from strategic relationship to transactional relationship. And this is problematic because when you are dealing with leaders, partners, even adversaries on a transactional base, your actions on one hand could be supportive to your policies, but is actually also canceling the effect of what you are doing. You should also be consistent because you cannot just deal with one thing and not the other. And just to give you an example, I mean, like if you're thinking in the consideration that we're pulling out from a region like the Middle East, and I'm no proponent of like military intervention, and last one to propose that, but there is a way about is just like what is replacing that and what other measures you're putting. You're pulling out, but at the same time you are putting in isolationist policies that impacts and hinders the ability of migration and mobility and refugees in a very dangerous time. What happens is that those people themselves are being weaponized in other regions. So we're seeing what Lukashenko is doing and bringing the refugees from Iraq and Afghanistan, putting them on the borders with Poland. And now those people are not just refugees, they're being weaponized. And that becomes a threat, not just for the region, not just for the US, but also for Europe. So you cannot be having one policy and then cancel it in a different way. And the other thing is just also being effective is the point. And that's one of my problems with the issue of summits as a vehicle in promoting democracy, because even when, for example, suggestions how to make this effective, there's an excellent paper by the Carnegie Endowment for Democracy on how to make this summit effective is to translate not these issues to policies, and not just policies, but directives. But actually, the directives are there. I mean, if you look back at the Security Assistance Directive of April 2013, it actually states all those issues, not giving support to countries that are undermining our values or contradicts our goals and missions, and it's there. And I think the issue is more than just issuing more directives, is to actually discuss and see how can we make this effective? What kind of measures that needs to be taken and political action in order to turn those directives into effective measures to make change.
Thank you so much. On this very important note, we're concluding our morning panel. Thank you so much to the organizers of the forum, and we'll look forward to the rest of our discussions today. And above all, thank you to the speakers and panelists.
Refreshments in the mezzanine.